sold a screenplay. So I got some dough now, and it just so happens that 12 days from now is the biggest toy show in Japan. This is the Super Festival, and I got a plane ticket, and I'm going. Or should I say we're going. So let's get psyched. We're going to track down some cool toys.
My name is Tom Franck, and I collect a lot of things, but I am known for collecting one particular line of Japanese toys, and I am further well known for my sort of maniacal 13-year hunt for one specific entry in that toy line. So the toy line is called Jumbo Machinders, and the character that I looked for and finally found was Garada K7. When I started collecting is kind of a confusing question, and why is a very big answer. And I am a little bit unusual, I think, in that I never stopped collecting. There was never this nostalgic return to going after the toys that I was interested in when I was a kid. In high school, it was tricky for me because I'm like, no, I'm not giving up on this. I'm still collecting toys. I collected comic books when I was young, and at that time, there was this attitude about collecting. People understood the idea of collecting comic books, of keeping them in good condition, that there really wasn't with toys at the time. It was sort of in the early 90s when the idea of keeping the box and, you know, these are valuable was really a thing. It was much earlier for me. By the time I was 12, I knew that keeping the boxes for toys was something that you wanted to do, and that condition was important, and that these were things that had a collectible dollar value assigned to them. And part of that was, you know, these robot shows that I watched were collected, and they were shown on Channel 25 in Massachusetts with a show called Force 5. And there was an ad when those shows were broadcast for a store in Waltham called Mr. Big Toyland. And I remember it was such a big deal. You know, I'm like, what is this store? And I remember my parents took me to it, and at that time, that really sort of sparked the idea that Japanese robot toys were a thing to collect. So this is before I'm in high school. So you get to high school, and what happens with a lot of people who ultimately later in life become toy collectors is toys and cartoons aren't really, it's not really cool to talk about them anymore. You can talk about girls, you can talk about music. So I sort of like kept my identity as like a big toy geek a secret. I collected in high school and I collected in college, and you know, after college I just kept going. So super robots are sort of the genre that I collect, the dominating force. I mean, if you look at this here, this is Ultraman Taro. This is a Jumbo Machinder of that, and that's a tokusatsu show. It's not a super robot. But super robots have the unofficial starting point for them with a manga and an anime called Mazinger Z, which was created by Go Nagai. So Mazinger Z 1972 is considered the starting point of super robots, and it was a giant smash hit. In 1972, you were looking at this huge population growth of children. You know, everyone now in Japan is talking about the graying of Japan and how Japan's getting older and there aren't enough people having children and there aren't enough kids around. And in the 70s, there were tons and tons of kids. There were more kids than ever before. And also in the 70s, you were talking about a period of time before video games. So Atari is the late 70s, and this is before that. So video games took a big bite into the world of toys. You know, that's more disposable income and paper route money that was going there rather than to toys. So before that, toys kind of had free reign everywhere. And that was very true in Japan. And cartoons had free reign. In the 70s, kids had much fewer things, and two of those things were cartoons and toys. So they were a big deal. And when Mazinger Z debuted, it not only saw this huge success of the show, but 1972 was the birth of Bandai's offshoot company, Popey. So Popey made a whole, just massive amounts of toys, a real golden era for Japanese toy making. And they made a line called Chogokin, which were die-cast figures. Now in Mazinger Z, the reason that the robot is indestructible and able to defeat the enemy Kikaiju of Dr. Hell week after week is he's made out of Chogokin, super combination alloy. So the idea with Chogokin toys is, hey kids, the toys that you're buying, these metal toys that you're buying, are made out of the same indestructible metal as your robot hero Mazinger Z. So Chogokin was a huge thing, and super robots were a huge thing, and there were dozens and dozens of animated robot shows in the 70s, and they were really glorious. And it goes, sort of the unofficial ending is around 1983, that's when Popey ends, and we're talking about, at that point, the movement to the genre of real robots, which begins with Gundam in 1979. But that it's not that clear a delineation, because Gundam did not do well when it was first aired. It was re-edited into 3 movies, and then it took off. And you've got realistic robots shows after that. You've got Dougram, you've got Vifam, you've got Dunbine, all of these shows. So super robots are kind of 1972 to 1983, but there are some shows that kind of extend beyond that. And it was really a magnificent time for toys. And I feel that Japanese toys, the single best year is 1976. That's when these toys were so deluxe, and there were just ridiculous amounts of them. And the extent to which people agree or disagree with that statement about 1976 is going to be largely influenced by the sort of emotional reaction they have to the idea of hard plastic as a toy medium. Because in the 70s, you're dealing with great die-cast metal, you're dealing with polyethylene, you're dealing with soft vinyl, and you're dealing with a lot of spring-loaded shooting gimmicks, which are just the coolest thing in the world to me. And those are expensive to produce, and companies began to realize that hard plastic in mass numbers is cheaper. So you get better engineering in robot toys. In the early 80s, you're talking about Microman to Diaclone to Transformers. So Transformers are sort of emblematic of the shift that we were seeing to hard plastic that could, bend in different ways. But, I'm more old school than that. I like the stuff in the 70s. And you're also seeing hard plastic being used for model kits, which is cheaper. You don't have to assemble the stuff. You don't have to paint the stuff. So Gunpla, Gundam plastic model kits, became this giant phenomenon. And it was, the profit margins on that were just huge. So that sort of kind of put the nail in the coffin for super robots. But they kind of said what they had to say, as it were. It did really play itself out. By the end, the later super robot shows aren't as good as the ones that sort of came before it. I like Grendizer was really popular. The Go Nagai shows, Great Mazinger, Get a Robo G was sort of the high water mark of that. But when you're dealing with nostalgia, as I was saying before, about going back to what excited you as a child, like the 90s really saw the revival of nostalgic interest in super robots. We started seeing modern toys of older characters. That's, I think 1997 is when Soul of Jogokin started, which is still going on to this day. So super robots had their, initial reign, but they're still really popular now in a nostalgic sense. I think they deserve that. I'm glad to see super robots still having their say to this day. So in addition to Chogokin, the other toy line that Popey did to launch the super robot line were Jumbo Machinders. The idea was, hey, these are giant robots, let's make giant toys of them. The first two were Mazinger Z and Kamen Rider V3. So they made prototypes of 100 centimeter tall toys. They were a meter tall. And that was deemed too large because they could crush a child at that height. So they reduced them to 60 centimeters, like this. And so about 2 feet tall. So with Jumbo Machinders, 60 centimeters tall, 2 feet tall, people watching this probably know some of them as the Shogun Warriors, which were released by Mattel in 1977. The thing about Jumbo Machinders is how massive they were. This is 2 feet tall, and they were expensive, but they weren't impossibly expensive. The reason that they're such a perfect storm of a collectible isn't so much that they were costly, is they just took up so much space. And you're thinking about how precious space is in Japan. So even if you're a rich kid, with wealthy parents in Japan, at some point, they're going to say, you know what, I'm not getting you any more of these things, So Jumbo Machinders, because of the space that they took up, they were thrown out in higher numbers. You'd see them in, garbage bins in the 70s. I was talking to people in Japan, like a wealthy kid might have 10 or 12, is what I was told, which is a lot. The Pokemon philosophy, gotta get them all, doesn't really work with Jumbo Machinders, at least when you're a kid, because where are you gonna put them? And that's still an issue today. So Jumbo Machinders have this odd purpose of, I think that they ultimately, unintentionally, were designed to be collected by crazy adults to try and get them all, because they're so challenging to collect and they're so expensive. They cost a lot of money because of the genuine rarity that they have. With Jumbo Machinders, I don't know that they were expecting it to be as big as it was, because they kept going until Popey folded. So they were going to release the first two, as I said, Mazinger Z and Kamen Rider V3. Popey said, you know what? To help sell these toys, let's make some store displays of the enemies that they fight, so that we can set them up in a store, and that'll help get kids excited about the heroic characters which they can buy. And the idea for that was so exciting that the feedback that they got is, hey, we want these enemy Machinders to be not just store displays, but actual products. So this is one of the first villains that they made, and you can see it's slightly smaller, and it came in this cardboard box. And so they made 4 of them. They made 2 for Mazinger Z and 2 for Kamen Rider V3. And those did well enough that they said, hey, let's make 6 more. So this one is Spartan K5 from Mazinger Z. So they made 6 in the second wave. And those are kind of the crown jewel of Jumbo Machinder collecting. I spent a lot of time looking at pictures of toy collections, as I'm sure a lot of people on this channel do. And I do feel that because of the nature of the internet and photography and Instagram and this and that, there is kind of this, arms race of toy pictures. And it's fun to look at this wall of toys and pick out oh wow, that's special. Oh my God, look, he has this or this. And you know, with Jumbo Machinders, like when I look at a collection, like, oh wow, look, he has a Shogun Warrior. There's Raideen, that's cool. Or you look at someone who has a bunch of them and they'll have a Japanese one. Like, oh, there's some Shogun Warriors and there's, you know, Dangard Ace. Wow, that's really special that he has that. And then at another level, you look at a collection of Jumbo Machinders and you'll say, wow, look, they have a villain, one of the 10 villains that they made. So it's sort of the elite of the elite are the villain Machinders. And that sort of gets into where you're going, which is the crown jewel of the villains. And there is by a wide margin. So the story behind that is Garada K7. The term Holy Grail is really thrown around a lot. And I remember in the 90s when I was trying to figure out Jumbo Machinders and it was mysterious, it was like archaeology. You know, you felt like Indiana Jones. You know, I went to Japan a number of times and I would talk to toy dealers and talk about what was made and what wasn't made. But I remember hearing that they made some villains and that they were a little smaller and they were made out of vinyl. And I remember someone telling me, yeah, I saw one of them and one of them had 2 heads. So that would be Doubles M2, who appears in the first episode of Mazinger Z. And he's one of 2 enemy robots that Mazinger Z is fighting, and the other is Garada K7. So I remember at that point thinking, oh, they must have made a Garada K7, and that's cool. Like, but no one had seen one. So the second series of Jumbo Machinder villains featured this box, but it's got the 6 villains in the series lined up. 4 from Mazinger Z and 2 from Kamen Rider V3. And they all had launching gimmicks. This one here shoots the spear from this. You pull it back. You know, these are all really hard to get. And, you know, Garada K7 is the hardest. And you say, well, why is it the hardest? You know, Garada K7 has a skull head and these sickle horns. And you have to remember that toy making was very different in the 70s when toys were aimed squarely at kids. So the theory is that because Garada K7 with its skull head is so terrifying that it might scare children, they only made a few of them because it wasn't going to go over well. And as you can see, they changed the paint design to green. This is not what Garada K7 looks like, but they added this green and they put these dots where the teeth lines are, maybe to make it look like a grasshopper or some sort of insect. It's a mystery, but they all were made that way. And it was such a rare toy, it wasn't clear that it was even made. You know, I remember I went to Japan 7 times and I was asking people about it and I was looking for it. And no one had seen one. People were thinking, oh, maybe they decided not to make it because it was too scary at all. And then there was a very famous toy scholar, Koji Igarashi. And there's a guy that I know who's a big sort of journalist about Japanese culture, Matt Alt, who did some writing for me on my website. He's the author of the book Pure Invention, which I recommend everyone to read. It's wonderful and it gives you a great history about Japanese culture and how it conquered the globe. He called me up from Japan and he said, I've seen a picture of Garada K7. And he described why it was different, painted differently. He said Koji Igarashi had shown it to him and he said his friend had it. So this was the first specimen ever known. But finally, you know, Matt Alt said, I've seen it, it's real, it's out there. And it wasn't like a catalog picture or something like that. It was in someone's collection. That was a big deal. And that picture ultimately showed up on the internet and people couldn't believe it. And then a year later, there was a warehouse in a city in Japan, a Bandai warehouse, and they were going to throw one out. They found a second one. And it was rescued and it was sent to the Bandai Museum and it was hung from baling wire. They didn't know what it was. And then people told them what it was and they rescued it and they put it behind glass and it's still in the Bandai Museum. I think the Bandai Museum has moved and that is like collectors from all over the globe travel there and they take their picture next to this Garada K7. So the first specimen then showed up for auction at Mandarake in 2005. And it was like 2.5 million yen, and someone put one bid on it, and it did. I was hoping like it wasn't going to sell, and because I couldn't, justify going after it for that much at that time. But it did sell, and then a year later, another specimen showed up, and they didn't know what it was, and it went on Yahoo Japan, and I threw $15,500 at it, and I did get it. And that came from Ishikawa, which was where the earthquake that just hit took place. So there was a lot of people who were upset that it left Japan when I got it, but perhaps it was spared being destroyed this year. It was really a big deal that I got it. I'm very thankful that I did. Is forgery a problem within the world of Jumbo Machinder? So there was a Japanese Twitter account which is exclusively dealing with pointing out auctions and sales that it believes to be fake, bootleg replicas. And sort of the attitude about this Twitter account, I've talked to a number of people about it, is the guy seems like a nutcase. You look at, like, Jumbo Machinders are made out of polyethylene. So the nickname for Jumbo Machinders is giant shampoo bottles, because that's the same material. And those have to be rotocast, and the molds are really expensive. So when you say like, oh, this robot factory Jumbo Machinder I believe is not legit, or this one, it's kind of hard to piece together that type of scam, because it seems like the market should be flooded more than it is. Like, if you're going to invest that, I don't know, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 in the molds, or whatever the number is, I'm not sure. Like, you'd have to sell a whole bunch of them in order to recoup the costs. And even if they're going for $5,000 a piece, I don't see how it pencils out. However, with the villains are, once again, not made out of polyethylene. They're made out of soft vinyl. And the molds for soft vinyl is much less expensive than hard plastic, than polyethylene, than all these other materials. On this channel, you profile a lot of people from DesignerCon. Designer vinyl is a thing because you can afford to make toys in low runs in vinyl, so it can still pencil out. So when you are talking about the potential of forgeries with the vinyl Jumbo Machinder villains, the risk seems much, much greater than with the polyethylene heroes. So I spent a lot of time looking at photos that are suspicious to me. Now, I'm very concerned about, the burden of calling something real or fake falling on me, especially from photos. All I'm saying is the potential for forgery for the villains seems much more dangerous, because the villains are more expensive anyway than the heroes. And I've looked at a lot of pictures, like with Garada K7, which once again which shared the same arms as Grengo C3. The fists are not symmetrical. The detailing on them is different. They were sculpted individually. They're not perfect mirrors of each other. And I'm looking at a picture of Grengo C3 that was up for auction, and the fists are identical. So that doesn't add up. That can't be right. A very great collector and a wonderful 3D artist, Mike DeConnick, and he and I spent a lot of time talking about this and going over every brushstroke. There are pictures on Spartan K5 counting the rivets from one end to another in these different places, and different specimens are having different numbers of rivets. So did one of these get 3D scanned and then molds were made from, and then you print it out and then you hand drill the rivets and the rivets don't add up? I don't know. It's a scary time. So when you're dealing with Jumbo Machinder villains, provenance is almost more important than condition. Like, if you know one that has been sitting in someone's collection for 20 years, maybe that's better than one that is more shiny and cheaper. So it's scary times that we're in, but I hope not. The father of super robots is Go Nagai. It starts, whether you want to count stuff that came before him or not, he's the guy. His contributions to manga and toys and anime simply cannot be overstated. So in 2018, he was the guest of honor at Anime Expo. And I had been friends with a movie producer who wanted to do something with him. And he wanted to sort of wine and dine him at a studio. And part of that was he wanted me to bring in some of my collection to show him. And, I jumped at the chance and I got to be in a room with him. So I was able to have a really good conversation with him. And I can't express how much that meant to me. These properties are really cherished, and it's difficult, when we're thinking about cartoon shows for kids, like how much of an impact they had in different countries. So for me, it's really the transition from Mazinger Z to Great Mazinger. So with this, Koji Kabuto, who's the pilot of Mazinger Z, he's still around. It's just there's this new threat, and his robot isn't good enough anymore. And Great Mazinger comes in and is able to defeat this new enemy. And Great Mazinger is built by Koji's father, who he doesn't know is still alive. So you've got this paternal love triangle going on, but just the replacement, the regime change from Mazinger Z to Great Mazinger is so moving to me because it's so real. When we're dealing with replacements in our own lives, it's not we die and someone else comes in. That's not normally the case. It's your girlfriend or boyfriend dumps you for someone better. You get replaced at work by some new hotshot who comes in. You get a baby brother or sister, and all of a sudden they get all of the attention. And watching this, I can't express how much I felt for Koji. And what happens to Koji Kabuto is he winds up showing up in Grandizer, and he's just piloting this little flying saucer. It's just you saved the world for 92 episodes, and this is what you're regulated to? And it's really disturbing. And just being able to express that to Go Nagai and tell him how deep it went, to me, I didn't sound like a normal fan for him. I think it really meant something to him. So he did draw me a picture of Garada K7. That was amazing. And he was completely friendly and just, I can't express what it meant to me in my life. But I was so worried in bringing in all of these toys from characters that he created. The producer was okay, yeah, we got to impress him, and this is really important. And I'm thinking to myself, this is Go Nagai. He is gonna look at this stuff, even Garada K7, which I spent 13 years looking for, and is super rare. This is the only person on the planet who might look at it and say, ho hum, I have 6 of those at home. But that wasn't the case. He's just oh my God, you have it. And he knew it was rare, and he was really impressed. And I asked him, I said, what is your toy collection like? Here's the guy who invented super robots. And I can only imagine, what he got in the 70s, how much stuff he must have. Does he have prototypes? And he said, I got nothing. He says, I was so focused on making manga at the time that I didn't care about the toys at all, and I didn't get any, and I deeply regret it.